Hey guys, Mark here yet again for more of our tour around West Yorkshire this week in the off-season shorts as they continue. We're talking about Huddersfield Giants this time. Long-time friend of the show and tech whiz Mark Wilkinson is on hand to recap 2018. Then journalism student and Huddersfield Examiner contributor Joe Buck pops by to talk off-season headlines. Then Joe dons his Giants fan cap to look ahead at 2019, and we get Mark back too for his predictions as well. So let's hear what the guys had to say about the Giants. Okay, I'm delighted for this Huddersfield SLP short that I'm joined by regular contributor to the Super League pod, Mark Wilkinson, from the FIFO Fun fanzine as well, but we'll all know him as Mark W off of the Twitter. Welcome along to the show, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No, it's definitely our pleasure to have you on board. So, like we've been doing with all the other ones, I'm going to run through my predictions and then what actually happened first before we talk about how the season went for Huddersfield. And do you know, Huddersfield have traditionally been one of the teams that I find it hardest to predict, and so it came to pass in 2018 as well, because I picked that they would be in the qualifiers, survive the qualifiers but be in the qualifiers, and actually Huddersfield managed to prove me wrong and finish 6th after the Super 8s, and no qualifiers troubles this year in the end. We did have another fan view before we get to yours on 2018, Mark. We had Paul Michael Craig, the Thunder from Down Under. He said, finished where I expected, but fuck me, we went the long way around about doing it.
Well, that's the way we do things. It's too boring just to stay in the middle of the table all season. You've got to make everyone sweat for a bit first.
Well, and that you did for some time of the season. I don't really know where you want to start, but the first point I've got down to note about, and probably what we should start talking about really, is Rick Stone was sacked after the round 7 hammering away to Wigan. You lost 48-10 in that game, and at that stage Huddersfield only had 2 wins and sat 11th in the table. So what was the start of the season like being a Huddersfield fan?
The start was brilliant. That first half hour at Hull FC I really enjoyed. It was just the next few months that were a nightmare. I think there was a lot of talk, sort of rumours in January that a few of the players were unhappy with the pre-season they'd had and that they were worried about their fitness levels, and I think that was really clear in the first game where we had a solid first half. We're only 2 points up, but we were the better team in the first half. But then second half we just looked knackered and Hull absolutely tore us apart. I think it was about 30 points they scored unanswered.
Yes, 38-12 it finished, and like you say, you were ahead in the game. So yes, so was that a theme early doors then, fitness being a problem?
I think fitness has been the problem for the past few years, to be honest, ever since we started this kind of, downward slump. There was talk of hiring a guy called, I think it was Steve Walsh at the start of 2017 as our new head of strength and conditioning. I think we got him from Toulouse Rugby Union, and then he quit after a week, so that wasn't a good sign. But I think when we start to turn things around, it's easy to point to Simon Wolford. But a month before that, we brought back in a guy called Mark Andrews. He was our head of strength and conditioning about 10 years ago. And one of the first things Chris Thorman did was get on the phone to him and say, look, can you come help us out? He was given the same job that Wolford would then be given, just try and get us through the qualifiers without relegation. And he did a decent job.
Yeah, I mean, so up at that point, the next game after the sacking, you mentioned Chris Thorman kind of came in at that stage, was the home draw against Leeds, 22-all. And I guess despite that, though, the poor form did continue with some big losses, and a lot of young players being played as well under caretaker boss Chris Thorman. So did you have any sort of sense at that sort of stage in the season that you could turn things around? I mean, there was the huge hammering away at St Helens and a big loss away at Warrington as well. And were you a bit worried at that stage, or did you think Thorman was on the right track?
I'd love to say that I was expecting it to turn out the way it did, but as you said, we won 2 of our first 13 games before Wolford came in, and I read somewhere that we'd need to win 8 out of the next 10 regular season ones to have any chance of the top 8, so that just seemed impossible. We ended up winning 9 out of 10, and I don't think anyone was predicting it at that point. But at that time, I sort of saw our form pick up a bit and our fitness pick up a bit. The problem is, I'm not going to blame injuries as an excuse. We were getting injured because we weren't fit enough. and then other players are having to play longer minutes, and they weren't fit enough, so they were getting injured, and it just kind of loops round like that. But once we started to really work on the fitness and get some bodies back, and we were able to play a full 80 minutes, it started to build up, and it laid the platform for what Wolford was then able to come in and do, I think.
Yeah, and you blooded some young players, and like you say, I guess guys were able to get up to speed as well during that time, and in a weird way, under a caretaker boss, the pressure's off maybe, so people were able to find the feet again for Wolford coming in after that round 13 defeat away at Warrington. So at first he was overseeing the team from afar, which was a bit of a strange setup, and a lot of people talked about that, and then up close, and during that time there was a run of actually a little bit even better than what you said. There was a run of 11 wins in the next 12 games before the season sort of petered out once top 8 Super League survival was assured. So, I mean, that must have been a great run and a total turnaround in your feelings as a Huddersfield fan.
Yeah, it was totally unexpected. I didn't really know much about Simon Wolford when we signed him, but he's really impressed me since he's come along. His attitude to the game, and he seems really well liked and well respected around the club, and that's what you need from your head coach, obviously. But yeah, we started to pick up a bit of form. I think the first win was against Widnes, I want to say.
Yeah.
Which, was maybe one of the easier games we had to play. But then we just carried that form on, and we just did seem to get better and better every week.
And they were some of them were close wins, but almost that started to show maybe a character in the side that had possibly been questioned, particularly with some of the rumoured high earners in the squad. And you actually started to see some of the players Huddersfield fans had been questioning, some of the signings that everyone else had been questioning, all the Bradford players and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Not to turn the form around.
Well, I think the best example of that is Lee Gaskell. I think he had a bit of a quiet first year. I think he was a bit of a scapegoat at times. Like, he'd make one mistake and everyone would pile on that and ignore, all the knock-ons and the first to no one. But he really put his performances over that time. I think the TV game against Castleford in the regular season, he was outstanding. He ran the show in a way that, again, no one really expected he would at the start of the year.
And that was at a time when Castleford were probably starting to find their best vein of form as well. So that was a big win, wasn't it? That proved that there was something real going on here with what Wolford was doing. Yeah,
that was the game that secured our top 8 status, I think. I think it might have been a draw at half time, and then the second half we just came out and just we were on fire, and that's the complete opposite of the whole game at the start of the season, where it was close at half time and we capitulated. Those narrow wins, we wouldn't have won them at the start of the year. We didn't have the right attitude for it. We didn't have the fitness to hold out those tight games when the pressure's on, but that's something that's really, really improved over the past few months.
Yeah, I mean, look, it did end with another run of losses, 5 on the bounce, but at that stage, do you think that the job was done and the thinking was more, let's gear up for next year?
Partially. I think after the Wakefield game when we lost, I think Wakefield came out in the second half and everything they did came off. They executed everything perfectly. And on the other side of it, I think we lost our bench for the last 20 minutes. That's not an excuse because Wakefield were outstanding. But it got to that point where it's like, right, that we're not going to win Super League this year. We'll have to accept that. Which, if you told me in April that I'd be saying that in start of September, like maybe we won't win the league, I'd have laughed in your face. Like you predicted at the start of the season, we'd survive the qualifiers. When we were bottom of the league in April, I was worried that we wouldn't survive the qualifiers, but it turned out okay.
One of the things we spoke about before over Twitter messages and stuff like that about Huddersfield's season is the amount of young players that came through, because Huddersfield aren't talked about as a team that produced some young talented players into the mix, but this year that's changed around. Who's impressed you out of the young players that have come into the side this year? Who you excited to see grow?
If Jake Wardle can stay fit, he's going to be an absolutely outstanding player. He's got all the potential in the world. He's just not been able to really string a good set of performances together. Really, well, he didn't get injured after his first game. He got, I think he got red carded for a suplex and then got banned. But it was definitely a red card, but more careless than anything else. Matty English as well. I can't believe that he was on loan for the start of the season. That was another thing that Thorman did quite early on, was bring him back from loan, and he's been a revelation at prop. I think he'll have a big year as well. Ollie Russell as well. Bear. Yeah, the polar bear. You have him in the team. Ollie Russell, who used to play in the Wigan Academy. he stepped in for Brough when he had his 3-game ban after the Catalan game. And the first 2 games, I think it was one at Headingley, and then Wolford's first home Super League game where he was actually there against Catalan. And he absolutely ran the show, and you'd never know he was 19. He was all over the place. His kicking game was spot on. And then we had the game against Hull KR, the only team we couldn't beat last year for some reason. We got absolutely battered by Hull KR both times, but had no problem, seeing off everyone else.
It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he was a bit, after doing 2 Super League games in a row, he was a bit tired, so we kind of lacked a bit of direction there. It's not his fault, he's only young. But yeah, he's really impressed me.
So, what were your highlights then this season? What games will stick out in your memory from 2018 as being your highlight moments?
That Leeds game at Headingley, to be honest, not just as a Giants fan. Like, if I were watching that as a neutral, I thought it was a really entertaining game. It was back and forth, quite close. The Castleford game I mentioned, where we sort of secured top 8 when that had seemed impossible a few months ago, that was brilliant. And Magic Weekend as well. I've never been so tense watching it, because we nearly threw away a comfortable lead in that second. We had one of our classic offloads out, into Rosie, and I was really going to throw it away, but held on in the end.
And that was kind of when Danny Brough had been coming in for a lot of criticism, and then he turned up in that game on the big stage at Magic Weekend, didn't he? And was really, really good. And finally, that I was not expecting Huddersfield to win that game. Certainly, sat in the stands and watching them, they were very impressive from the side that I'd last seen against Wigan get absolutely destroyed. So.
Yeah, I missed the game at the DW, but I remember you telling me you were just in shock at how bad we were.
Yeah.
But at that point, we were playing some of the worst rugby I've seen us play in 10 years. But yeah, we turned it around, and hopefully more of the same next year.
What about was there any other individuals who were of note? Who would have got your Player of the Year award for Huddersfield?
For me, Paul Clough would have been a close second. I think he does everything on the pitch and maybe goes a bit unnoticed at times. I mean,
totally. What? I was disappointed in the general SLP listenership that he didn't receive more votes for the most underrated player in the 2018 slot.
Well, no, because Matty Ashurst had to win that despite being in the actual dream team. He's very underrated. I like Matty Ashurst. I'm not having a dig at him.
No.
But yeah, Paul Clough, he's one of those where if you're not paying attention to him, you'd be forgiven for not thinking he does much. But when you really, take notice of what he's doing, he's everywhere, and he's got the stats to back it up as well. But for me, Player of the Year has to be Ryan Hinchcliffe.
Right.
There was just so many times when we just looked a completely different side when he was on the pitch, and he'd be subbed off, and suddenly we'd concede a try instantly. He led our defence, and he kind of had a leadership quality on field as well, which a lot of the time we turn to Danny Brough for that. But then when we're losing and his temper goes, we don't have that anymore. Hinchcliffe's a bit more of a cool, collected guy. Then again, we're talking about Danny Brough, so the bar isn't that high for being cool and collected.
No, it's not. But all in all, obviously, happy after 2018 as a Giants fan?
Yeah, there's a lot of positives to take away from it. If you kind of go back to what I said at the start, how I think it mainly came down to fitness. Mark Andrews has now signed on for 3-year contracts. Wolf's still there. And by all accounts, their pre-season is the most intense they've had in years. Like, there's a few social media posts have gone out, and they all look in great shape. So I'm hoping we can start strong, carry on the form that we had in the middle of the season, and make a good run of it.
Right. Okay. So that's our look back at 2018 then for the Huddersfield Giants. Thanks for being part of that, Mark.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Right, so to take us through what's been going on at the Huddersfield Giants in the off-season, we've got a rugby league journalist, sort of student journalist, and coming up the ranks at the Huddersfield Examiner and doing some bits for the Huddersfield Giants website. So we're hoping that we'll get some great insight from Joe Buck. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
No, it's
nice
great to have you on. To have such a prestigious name in the world of sports broadcasting as Joe Buck on the Super League pod is a real delight. Now, before we get into chatting a bit of the meat around the stories that have been going on with Huddersfield, I think we should cover off who the transfers are. So just run through the sorts of names first. So the outs, the big name outs is Hinchcliffe, Brough and Mamo. Shannon Wakeman's also gone, and some of the younger players have departed for pastures new as well. Mikey Wood, Tyler Dickinson, Nathan Mason. Is it Mason? I've just written down Mason, Greenwood, Mellor, and Johnson. And then the players that have